Hi, welcome to the Canaccord Genuity Growth Conference. I'm Kyle Mixon. I cover life science tools and diagnostics for Canaccord. Pleased to welcome you to a fireside chat with GRAIL here with us today. GRAIL is offering the first of its kind, first commercialized MCED test for multi-cancer early detection. And we'll talk more about that today. With the company, we have Bob Ragusa, CEO, and then Aaron Frieden, CFO. So thanks guys for joining us today. Appreciate it. So just maybe Bob and Aaron just talk about the second quarter results. You announced those last night. Pretty good quarter. Just start there at a high level.
Sure. So thanks, Kyle, for having us here. It'd be great to talk about the GRAIL story with you. So yesterday we announced, so in Q2, we had strong demand for our Gallery tests. So U.S. Gallery grew more than 20% to 34 million. And from a test number, we grew the test number to 45,000, about 29% growth. As you remember, Q2 and Q4 tend to be our strongest quarter, so it was nice to see that step up in Q2. From a guidance perspective, we reiterated guidance of 20 to 30% U.S. Gallery commercial growth. From a cash burn perspective, we had gone out at 320 million as the guide for the year of cash burn. We've actually dropped that down to 310. We've really seen good progress since our restructuring. Just about a year ago, we did a major restructuring, and so we're seeing the fruits of that. On the study side, with Pathfinder 2, we're planning on presenting the detailed data from Pathfinder 2 at ESMO in October of this year. If you recall, in June, we put out the top-line results where we showed substantially better positive predictive value, as well as substantially better cancer detection rate compared to our Pathfinder study. And we also saw a consistent cancer signal of origin and specificity or false positive rate compared to the Pathfinder study. And in both studies, both Pathfinder 2 and Pathfinder, there were no serious adverse events. So we're now looking forward to having the readout of our two large registrational studies, both Pathfinder 2 and NHS Gallery. For NHS Gallery, we'll do a full data readout for that mid next year, and those are both the studies that we're going to use to file our PMA. And so I think one of the important things that we wanted to put out there is that we've done, between Pathfinder 2, NHS Gallery, the large prospective studies in the intended use population. And you're seeing now data sets coming out from various companies at earlier stages and trying to make comparisons against those. And we think that's kind of apples and oranges. So you have to really look at what stage the studies are in, and are they in the intended use population.
Great. So
anything, Aaron?
Sorry. Yeah. In the quarter, it's a lot there that I'd love to kind of touch on. So in the quarter, though, there was elevated repeat testing. I think if you look at the ASP, a little bit lower quarter over quarter, still in that I think it's nearly 800 per test. I think that was because there was higher or more repeat testing from customers, and that was 25%. The rate of repeat testing was 25%, which compares to 20%, which I think is a number that stood for a year or so. So what happened in the quarter on that front?
Yeah, so we're pretty happy with the repeat test rate. So last quarter, it was the first time we talked more publicly about it, at 20%. We've seen a steady increase over time. And so this past quarter, the 25% is something we're pretty happy with and seeing that progress. From the ASP front, we actually went out and contracted a number of the providers, since that was the biggest driver of ASP drop, is kind of large-scale contracting of everybody at a little bit lower price. But I think your point, there is some effect to a repeat testing in some of the channels would bring that down as well.
Okay, and then there's also a sequential decline in COGS per test. How did the Gallery 2.0 rollout affect that?
Yeah, so if you recall, at the very end of last year, for multiple years, we made a substantial investment in the new V2 Gallery. And what that really was is GRAIL's been built from the very beginning as a population scale testing company. And so we recognize that in order to do hundreds of thousands, millions, and then tens of millions, we needed a scalable platform. We operate a sequencing-based test, so fairly complex. And we decided to make the investment to nearly fully automate that entire process. And so that's what was launched at the end of last year. One other key element with that is we really used all the data we've taken over several 100,000 samples, both commercial and research, to really optimize the panel. And so we made a substantial optimization based on the new knowledge we had. And that basically made more efficient use of a flow cell is the easiest way to think of it. So more samples per flow cell.
And then on the COGS note, I think the 2.0, was that pretty smooth in the quarter in terms of like turnaround times and things like that, or were kinks still being worked out?
Yeah, so we had talked about last year when we coming into 2025 that we'd made substantial investment, and that investment would continue into 2025 because we knew bringing up a large-scale system like that would require a lot of effort. So in terms of turnaround time and reprocessing rates, those are still higher than we would have wanted at this point in time. So we think we're narrowing in now on that, but it has taken a little bit longer than we would have expected.
Okay, so just stepping back at a higher level, the revenue number may have sort of like missed the street what we were estimating, but that's mainly because in the screening number, the Galleri, that was pretty solid, but the development services, the biopharma side, that was $1 million or $2 million short of what we had, for example. So what drives that line, and is that part of the restructuring? Is maybe that line is going to be decelerating or contracting a little bit?
And you want to maybe talk to that one?
Yeah, so as part of the restructuring, we wanted to really just focus on our MSED-I, Galleri test, right? That's what GRAIL was built for, large population scale screening for early cancer detection. And in doing so, we've allocated resources there so we can get through our main inflection points, clinical utility data readout from NHS, FDA approval, and so on. As a result, we're not expanding the pharma bio-revenue PDX program. We're supporting and continuing to work with the partners that we've already have agreements with. So that revenue stream is about where it will be. And as you all know, it's a lumpy revenue stream, given biopharma partners can move their priorities around themselves, which is some of the explanation for why you see that lumpiness.
Makes sense. Okay. And then on the restructure, which was August of a year ago almost. So you cut by a lot. You cut cost by a lot. You cut a lot of programs as well. How was it really hasn't affected the ability to grow too much. You're still growing 20+% on that core kind of Galleri business. Yeah. Has that been quite the effort, like to kind of maintain productivity, or just kind of the test is just the inbound, the demand is just so strong that it doesn't even matter?
Yeah, so I think it's the mix. Internally, it was a very major restructuring, so there was a lot of kind of internal effort. And as Aaron mentioned, the real focus was on Galleri to make sure we had the funds to get us through the milestones in Galleri. And you see the results. PDX has definitely suffered a little bit from that. But we've been really diligent in the cash management process, and that's why part of the guide coming down is we feel more confident this year in terms of our cash burn. And so we think that the efforts we took last year have really been effective. And importantly, they've given us flexibility. We're in a new field. MSED, we're pioneering it, so we know we're going to face some uncertain challenges. So having the flexibility there is going to be really important.
Great. Then on the cash flow note, so and then just the EBITDA was a loss of like $80 million or so, which again kind of like beat most expectations in the quarter from an operating expense side of things. Unless you beat on gross margin, from the OpEx side of things, where did you come in better than expected? What's more efficient than you kind of anticipated?
Yeah, Aaron, you want to?
Yeah, so we were a little bit under our plan for the first half. Not very significant, but enough for us to bring down the guide for the rest of the year. I think we're really just realizing some certainties in the restructuring plan that we went through. So we had to implement it. We had to make sure we continued to hit the milestones and the goals that we had, the growth that we had, and that's realizing a little bit more efficiently than we thought we would. We had a little bit of cost savings that we implemented at the beginning of the year that we're seeing flow through for the year as well.
Gotcha. And then Bob, the data now, they're very important. Everything is like it's been on track, which is good to see, and your milestones are coming up. So you have Pathfinder 2 readout at ESMO 2025 pretty soon in the fall. Then you have the NHS Galleri longitudinal data, like kind of mid-year next year. PPV is the main metric that you guys kind of point to, kind of tell us to focus on. Maybe just talk about why PPV matters for Galleri, for MCED, and then it's going to be substantially higher than prior studies you've said, which was 43% is the kind of the bogey.
Right.
Is substantial like double 43%? Like how should we think about that word substantial?
Yeah, I think it's hard to put more color on that. So we'll get real clarity when we do the full readouts. We're going to preserve that for ESMO and then for 2026. But I think you can read into the word substantial. And why we think it's important is, and it's not just PPV. It's our low false positive rate, or high specificity of 99.5%, as well as our cancer signal of origin. And so if you think about as you implement it into actual medical practice, there's a physician and a patient at the other end of this. And so having a very high positive predictive value means that as you're screening populations, and it's a very low prevalence, right? So, but as you're screening, you get a positive, the probability that you're actually, that this person actually has cancer is very, very high. So, in our test, even at 43%, it's an order of magnitude higher than many of the other single cancer screens. So FIT testing, Cologuard, mammography, all those things have single-digit positive predictive values. So that's why, from a physician perspective, when you get a positive and no, they say, don't worry, but we have to go check it out. Whereas when you have Galleri, when you're close to, at 43%, you're close to a coin flip. You're like, no, we got to really go check this out. And in fact, we've seen some areas like Mayo Clinic where they're up near, nearly 70% they recently published on, because they now know that you really, if you see a positive, go look, and they've figured out the right protocols and gotten to very high positive predictive value. And that, again, coupled with the cancer signal of origin, so it's directing and guiding the workup, we think just makes for a really powerful diagnostic system for the practitioner.
So Mayo has published 70% PPV, you said?
It's right around
73-ish, I think.
All right, interesting. Yeah. So, and when you guys announce the data, like at ESMO, let's say, will you be able to break it out by cancer type and even stage maybe? Because that's, again, I think what the stage shift is the main question kind of for MCED.
Yeah, so the Pathfinder 2 study is going to show performance and safety because it's a single-year screen. When we get to NHS Galleri, that's where you'll see clinical utility, stage shift, because that was 3 successive years with a year of follow-up across 140,000 people, again, in the intended use population.
Okay, great. And then from the, I guess like the broader landscape, to the extent that you can kind of comment on this, like maybe just how are you thinking about the other data that you've seen from multiple tests out there? The sample sizes aren't large, prospective versus case control, things like that. I just, again, tell us why, we should be more comfortable or confident in your data relative to others.
Yeah, so if you just look at the progression, one of the things that we're really comfortable with is our case control data replicated in Pathfinder very well. So Pathfinder was about 6,600 people. And then, we now have 2 large prospective studies in the intended use population. And so with Pathfinder 2, it's 35,000 people. NHS Galleri, it's 140,000 people. So these are large studies. And, at the top line results that we've already put out on both of them, again, not only are they replicating, they've actually gotten better on a couple of key parameters as we brought them into the intended use population. You recall in many of these studies, case control data doesn't replicate in the intended use population. In fact, it usually deteriorates. And so as you're looking at these other data sets that are much earlier in the process, you have to handicap them, by the fact that they're not in the intended use population and they're not prospective studies.
Yeah, so we have an MCED test being launched in like a month or so. Any feedback from customers? Maybe they're asking more questions about that or about your test, or comparison stuff, or maybe less ordering, kind of the market might be frozen or something possibly. There is like a need for this, I guess, but still, given there's like going to be options, any impact from that possibly?
So not a lot of impact yet. Like you said, it's going to launch next month. I think a couple of things as we've had discussions. I think the much higher false positive rate. We thought it was going to be 3x. It looks like it's going to be closer to 5x the false positive rate of Galleri, just based on their published specs. And we think just in, that coupled with no cancer signal of origin capability makes the implementation into, real world medical practice just much, much more difficult.
Yeah, and then another competitor got breakthrough device designation, in the past few months. Galleri got that in 2019, I think. So,
Yeah.
Maybe does it help to have more, kind of in the news flow, and maybe this helps the Medicare process or the FDA or the guideline process too eventually?
Yeah, in competition in general, it's actually a good thing. I think over the last decade, GRAIL's been kind of out there pushing it on their own. So we're kind of pushing the rock uphill single-handedly. So I think the more people out there talking positively about MCED, talking about the potential of it, is really helpful for us and for the entire field. So I think that part of it is really useful. So we really welcome that element. We also do have levels of concern around just how it gets implemented is also important too, so that we make sure the MCED field stays positive and really has the rigorous work that we've done in studies to be able to show the effectiveness and the clinical validation of the test.
Yeah. So in terms of adoption, you've targeted the concierge, you've targeted now. I think kind of partnering with more payers. Commercial players, obviously, Medicare is still out there. So maybe first on the kind of partner note, you've announced a bunch kind of recently. Quest, you have a long-standing partnership with them. I think that was like high single-digit % of the volume, maybe in the second quarter was through Quest, which is honestly pretty good number. The Athena Health, you have more EMR integration. I'm sure there's more coming possibly with that to make ordering more streamlined. And then you have Function Health and Everlywell and all these companies. So, how is that? Has that been helping lift volume at all? I mean, are we seeing that play out in the P&L now, or is that like a future benefit?
Yeah, so we're, some of them are early days, but things like the Quest integration that you mentioned, we find that anytime you take friction out of the system, we see uplift. It's almost as simple as that. In our first responders and some of our employers, when we do large events, we get a whole significant number of blood draws in one day. So anytime you take friction out, it improves it. In Quest in particular, we saw in the first half, we saw over 500 healthcare professionals order through the Quest platform. So that was really great to see. And then 7% of the volume in Q2 came through the Quest integration platform. And so we're seeing more people coming onto that. Some of the providers are kind of automatically hooked in. The Galleri test is already there for them to order. But for the majority, they have to do a short integration. It's typically a few weeks to be able to do that integration. So we should see a steady increase. The nice thing about it is the Quest providers that are the providers that are on the Quest platform, we're really seeing an increased volume, ordering volume per provider in those. So it's the higher volume people who tend to really utilize that, and that ease and lack of friction really helps. And then maybe on Athena Health, 160,000 providers are on that platform. Importantly, for where we are today, a lot of concierge physicians heavily use that platform, and so it's a nice integration for us. And so we think, that's early days for that one, numerically, but we expect that one to play out well for us. Aaron, any other?
We're really excited to be working with Function Health. They're growing their membership base. We're a very close partner of theirs, and I think them and plus all the other telemedicine longevity providers like Everlywell and so on will provide us a really nice, efficient way to grow with them as they're making their mark.
Yeah, I think the wellness longevity trend is definitely aligns with Galleri, so that can be helpful.
Yeah.
On the Medicare side, so we've had the Nancy Sewell bill or act has been kind of ongoing for a number of years. There's been a lot of support, honestly, but it's never just passed through Congress totally. So, what do you have optimism that will succeed relatively soon? And then what do you just talk about what you're doing, the lobby, quote unquote lobbying, and reducing the pricing in anticipation of maybe that being passed, given the price point in that act, I think is $500 or so. Yeah, just overall, how do you think about Medicare?
Yeah, so we're optimistic, but as you mentioned, it has been a while, but we are optimistic that the end of year funding bill will be a great vehicle for it. It has unprecedented support. It's one of the few, bipartisan issues that everybody gets behind in terms of finding cancer in asymptomatic patients. The Medicare population is the most impacted by cancer, so there's a lot of support. We have more than half of the House and more than half of the Senate are co-sponsors on the bill. So they're not just supportive, but they're actually co-sponsors. So in terms of the numbers, it's the third most co-sponsored bill in Congress, and it's the number one co-sponsored bill of a healthcare bill. And so it's really looking for the right funding vehicle, because I think there's a tremendous amount of support behind it. And then from an advocacy standpoint, there's over 700 advocacy groups that are pushing for this, because again, everybody's family has been impacted by cancer. So it's something that's really obvious to get behind. And the important element, kind of ties back to other people entering the field. It's not a GRAIL bill. This is an MCED category bill, and so we've seen in other screening modalities that when reimbursement becomes clarified, you see a lot more innovation in the field, and so that's what we're excited about as well. Is we'll, having that reimbursement more clarity on that pathway will definitely, show, and encourage a lot of innovation in the field.
Okay, and this is again kind of like not a very fair question, but do you think that milestone will happen first to get coverage, or do you think you need the FDA approval and the USPSTF guideline inclusion? Because those two things can get you Medicare coverage as well, I think, right?
Yeah, there's multiple ways to getting there. We're not really in a position to handicap one versus the other. We have time for one, and so the first focus is really on the MCED legislation. We think that's the fastest pathway, and so we're still hopeful for that one.
Yeah, I mean, we will. Excuse me, we will need FDA approval for both of those paths, and there's nothing preventing us from running both paths at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, in terms of the FDA process, the timeline I believe is like first half of 26.
Yeah.
And you have NHS and Pathfinder 2. That's the data. The data sounds like it's going to be ready by that time. So that the milestone should occur. But how do you? I mean, this is like an unprecedented situation. This is like the first of a novel test. There probably will be an AdCom. This could be an extended period of time. Do you think that like the ultimate label could be like contested in terms of like how many cancers are in this label, or could you be approved for like 20 or something like that, or how's that going to work?
Yeah, so a couple things. So we're planning on submitting. We're doing a modular submission. We anticipate having the last module submitted in the first half of next year. Because we're the first one for a PMA on an MCED, we expect an advisory board, as you say. So we expect the overall approval process to take about a year, and so that fast forwards into 2027. In terms of the labeling and stuff, it's unclear how many we'll get, but from the early advisory board, they've given the indication that we're going to be able to report out all the cancers we find, and so it's really a first page, second page on the report out, because what they want to do is be able to know, let providers know if we found something there. They want to let them know, but then there'll be the cancers that we have enough data and evidence behind, and then there'll be another subset where they found that there's not necessarily enough evidence to show, all the specifications on that, but you're able to show that the cancer is there. So for us, commercially, that's probably the most important element, to be able to show providers all the cancers that we're finding.
Right, and to be honest, like not every cancer type, Galleri doesn't have great performance for every cancer type, to be fair, but like, most tests probably don't for, breast cancer, for example. It's tougher blood, but either way, the main concern, maybe if you don't have as many cancers on the label, would be like the price point. The value proposition could be, like reduced, let's say, or like less favorable. Is that possible, or just given it's like so novel, this could be like an ADLT payment rate situation, and you would be at the list price? Like, how do you got to think about the price point possibly? Yeah,
well, we think the value. We're already showing the value out in the market today, so we don't think that's too much of an issue. From a sensitivity standpoint, we, in Pathfinder, we showed that we detect more than twice the number of cancers of standard of care as adding to standard of care screening. So we already had 2x. We said our cancer detection rate is substantially better. So the follow-on data should show an improvement even on that spec. In terms of actual the actual cancers we detect, we preferentially detect highly shedding cancers, highly aggressive cancers. So, from a clinical significance, the cancers we're finding are the ones that you really have to do something with. Where we're not finding cancers is indolent prostate and indolent more breast cancers. So things that are far less aggressive that aren't shedding into the blood. And so it's there's some publication on it as well that shows that the cancers we're detecting are the very aggressive ones, which is why when providers start really understanding that feature, they get much more comfortable with the overall performance of the test.
Got it. And then on the cash notes, so we're talking about some milestones here, FDA and Medicare. These could be completed in the next few years. I assume those are obviously critical to get that run rate into 2028 or so. Yeah. But again, given the runway is only a few years, you're going to need it's going to take more probably to scale this thereafter. The stock is up 80% year to date. As the last I checked, what's your thoughts on raising capital in this environment and just funds in general?
Yeah, Aaron, maybe you want to.
Yeah, so we're funded into 2028, which is well past some of these near-term readouts for NHS Gallery, for PMA submission, and so on. So we've read out top-line data for those things. We're confident in the studies and the data that we've ran, and so we don't have a need to raise right now. We might as well get through those things and see what we need for the business going forward.
Okay, got it. I guess as we look to 2026, we already talked about a lot that to expect in terms of milestones and catalysts and stuff. But anything else that people aren't really appreciating or following that we should monitor going into next year?
No, I think the questions really covered everything quite well. Probably the one thing I'd add that, these discussions by their very nature is always what's going to happen in the future. I think it was important to remind today, this week, next week, every week, over the last year, we're detecting significant number of asymptomatic cancers, and so for patients and providers, it's real time now happening, and so we're just happy to be able to really provide that service for patients and providers at this point.
Perfect. Okay, great way to end it. Thanks guys for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Kyle.
Thanks.